I didn't notice the damage at first. That's the thing about indifference. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in quietly, settles into corners you stop checking, and waits until the structure is weak enough to collapse on its own. When I think back to the beginning, it feels almost embarrassing how certain I was. We weren't dramatic people. We didn't fight loudly or make scenes. We took pride in being steady, in being the couple that others described as calm and mature. I thought that meant we were safe. My wife, Lena, used to listen to me. I don't mean she just heard the words. She noticed the pauses between them. When I came home tired, she could read it in the way I took off my shoes. When something excited me, she leaned in, even if the topic bore her. There was effort in her attention, and effort feels like love when you're living inside it. The shift was so subtle that I didn't question it. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded. Her responses became efficient, like she was closing tickets rather than engaging with a person. How was your day? Fine. What do you think about this? Whatever you want. At first, I told myself this was adulthood. Stress. Work. Life settling into routine. I adjusted without realizing I was the only one doing the adjusting. When I spoke, she nodded at the right moments but kept scrolling. When I stopped mid-sentence, she didn't notice. When I shared something important, her reaction arrived late, like a delayed echo. I tried harder. I planned small surprises, cooked dinners, suggested walks, asked questions that required more than one-word answers. She didn't reject me outright. That would have hurt less. She simply met my effort with neutrality. Not coldness. Not anger. Just nothing. Indifference is dangerous because it doesn't give you something to fight. There's no clear villain, no explosive moment that forces a decision. It just teaches you to lower your expectations until disappointment feels normal. I remember the first time I realized I was lonely while sitting right next to her. We were on the couch, a show playing that neither of us was really watching. I laughed at something, turned to share it, and saw her absorb in her phone. I waited for her to look up. She didn't. I laughed alone, and the sound felt out of place, like noise in an empty room. I didn't confront her then. I told myself it wasn't worth making a big deal out of something small. That sentence would become a habit. When she forgot my presentation day, I told myself she was busy. When she didn't ask how it went, I told myself she assumed I'd tell her if it mattered. When she stopped touching me unless I initiated, I told myself attraction naturally fades and returns. But it didn't return. What faded instead was my voice. I stopped bringing things up because I could already predict her response. Neutral. Non-committal. Detached. I didn't mean it like that. You're overthinking. It's not that serious. Each phrase landed softly, but together they buried me. There was no infidelity to point at. No dramatic betrayal. Just a slow erosion of presence. She didn't hurt me with cruelty. She hurt me by refusing to care enough to notice the hurt at all. The worst moments were public. Friends would ask us questions, and she would answer for both of us, without looking at me. Decisions about our plans, our future, even my preferences were handled as if I were an accessory rather than a participant. I'd catch her tone, polite, distant, practiced. The tone you use with someone you don't want to know too well. At night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when I became invisible. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for the moment I lost her respect, her curiosity, her interest. I kept assuming there had to be a specific mistake. There wasn't. Indifference doesn't need a reason. It just needs permission. And I kept giving it that permission by staying quiet. The day something finally broke wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No tears. Just a question she asked without looking at me. Do you really need to talk about this now? I had been trying to explain why I felt disconnected. I had chosen my words carefully, softened every edge, made sure I didn't sound accusatory. I spoke like someone asking for a favor rather than expressing pain. Her sigh was heavier than any insult. I realized in that moment that my feelings had become an inconvenience to her schedule. Something went still inside me. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped waiting. Instead, I watched. I noticed how she didn't ask where I was going anymore. How she didn't notice when I stopped sharing details. How she accepted my silence as easily as she had dismissed my words. And that's when the truth landed with brutal clarity. She wasn't unaware of the distance. She was comfortable with it. Indifference wasn't accidental. It was chosen. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I began to detach, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. I redirected the energy I'd been pouring into a closed system back into myself. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I invested in work without apologizing for it. I reclaimed small routines that belonged to me alone. She noticed the change, but not in the way I had once hoped. There was no concern about my emotional state, no curiosity about my inner world. Instead, she asked, "Is something wrong with you?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did I miss something?" Just mild irritation at the disruption of the familiar. That question told me everything. I didn't leave immediately. Indifference doesn't end relationships quickly. It just makes them hollow enough that leaving feels like stepping out of an abandoned building rather than tearing down a home. When I finally told her I couldn't live like this anymore, she looked surprised. Not heartbroken. Not devastated. Confused. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said. And I believed her. Not because it wasn't obvious, but because indifference dulls awareness. When you stop caring, you stop looking. There was no dramatic plea to stay. No sudden transformation. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we had been standing on opposite sides of the same silence for a long time. Walking away hurt, but it was a clean pain. The kind that heals instead of festers. What stayed with me wasn't anger, it was the lesson. Love doesn't always end with betrayal or hatred. Sometimes it ends because one person kept caring, and the other let indifference do the damage. Now, when I think about what I need, it's not grand gestures or constant reassurance. It's presence, attention, the willingness to notice. Because indifference isn't neutral. It's destructive. And once you've lived inside its slow collapse, you learn to recognize the sound of things falling apart, even when no one else seems to hear it.